Hello and welcome to Pharma Television News Review here at Oz Biotech in Melbourne. On this show I have Jim Greenwood, who is President and CEO of Bio, based in the US. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Jim, you're here in Australia. What do you think of Australia?
I think Australia has made incredible strides, and they have very clearly articulated ambitions when it comes to biotechnology. Just yesterday, the Premier of Victoria, where we're sitting, came out with, I think, what is their third biotech plan. There are not very many states in the United States that have biotechnology plans. So to see that in a place like Victoria is really quite impressive. And what they've done is amazing, and particularly if you think in terms of the investment in dollars per capita. This is a country of 22 million people. It is a state, Victoria is a state of 5 million people, and yet they have invested in, made huge investments. I'm talking $500 million in a new cancer center, hospitals, at the La Trobe University where I was yesterday. The agro-bioscience commitment that they've made is astonishing. So you have a government here that understands both the need for a generally favorable business climate, and then specifically understands the potentiality in terms of not only economic growth, but in terms of quality of life for the citizens. Australia, I think, very much gets it.
Right. Of course, you mentioned how important, or how the track record of Australian innovation is very well known in science, but in particularly in biotechnology as well. But you've mentioned something which is really important, which is how policy, government policy, can greatly influence how this industry can grow. And in your observations, you've mentioned some of the important things that have changed here. Equally, those things are happening in the US. So how would you compare Australia to the US? Are they completely different countries in terms of what they're trying to do, or are there similarities?
Well, I think there's similarities. I think it's fundamentally just, frankly, a time difference. America got into the process in a big way earlier in biotech hubs like San Francisco and Boston. So I think it's probably fair to say that Australia got into the game a bit later, and they are building from scratch. And the thing that I always say as I travel around the country of the U.S. and also around the world is that biotech is not a zero-sum game. It's not that there's only so much biotechnology business available, and if you want to build something in Australia, you have to go steal it from San Francisco. The fact of the matter is that we have an infinite amount to learn about biology and about how to apply that knowledge, and it all begins with great universities, and you have them here in Australia. So I think what's important is for Australia to continue to increase its funding of research at the university level and at the applied level. Resources are key, not only the intellectual resources, but the financial resources. I think that Australia needs to continue to work on then transferring that technology into commercial startups. And then the very difficult thing is how do you help those emerging companies to get through the valley of death? 10 years ago, it was fairly simple for companies in the U.S. to take a ride on the biotech bubble. And venture capitalists were throwing money, frankly, at companies because of the promise of the Human Genome Project. Now, not only in the United States, but everywhere, investors are much more cautious, particularly in the wake of this global credit crunch. And so not only here in Australia, but around the world, I think governments are going to have to take a very hard look at what is necessary to provide the resources for early stage companies.
You were here on the invitation of Anna Lavelle from Oz Biotech. How does two organizations like yourselves can grow or cooperate to ensure that you work to mutual benefit? Because clearly there are things that you can do across exchange in terms of ideas and thought process and even learnings. So how does that work between the two of your organizations?
With these national conventions, whether it's our international convention that we hold once a year or Biotech's convention here, are necessary opportunities for that kind of cross-fertilization. So when we have our meeting, I think I said today that 535 meetings occurred between Australians and other partners from the U.S. and around the world last year in Chicago. And that provides the setting for collaborations and investments and partnerships to begin to develop. And similarly here at this convention, just yesterday they had their investor portion of the convention, and I think 120 some investors were here, and many of them were Americans. So they come here and they take a look at these companies, and out of that grows this collaboration. And it's not only a collaboration that involves dollars and cents, but it's a way to share knowledge and information. And that's really the way the global industry is growing, that constant cross-fertilization.
Right. Let's just flip back to the US, because that's where your main operations are, obviously. Now, one of the things that you've mentioned in your speech today was the healthcare reforms. So what's the current view here for people in the biotech industry in the US? How do you feel about where we've got to in terms of the legislation? There is another round of elections coming in and so forth. This can all change again. So how is that affecting the mood, and particularly the investment mood, within the biotech sector in the US?
Well, the mood was quite bleak prior to the conclusion of the debate on healthcare reform, because no one knew how it was going to come out. It was clear from the beginning that the Obama administration and the Congress intended to place much of the burden for the cost of expanding access on the industries, not only the pharma industry and the biotech industry, but the device industry, the insurance industry, et cetera. And that has meant for the biopharmaceutical industry more rebates, more taxes, more fees, and of course that all digs into revenue, which means there's less revenue available for innovation. And so for us it was a constant battle to say, don't forget about innovation. What has been accomplished in terms of the healthcare reform bill is we've managed to put 30 or 40 million more people into America's broken healthcare system. And I say it's broken because it's a fee-for-service system where you get paid for a volume of service and not quality of service, and certainly not based on your prevention of diseases and promotion of wellness. So all of that has to change, because what we have now is unsustainable. We at Bio came out with some good wins. We got our biosimilars legislation, as we've spoken before, into the bill in a way that we think is going to be good for the enterprise of biologics. We got $1 billion of refundable tax credits will be distributed in just the next several days. So those things were good. You asked about the coming election cycle. There appears to be a Republican wave coming towards Washington that will probably mean that the House of Representatives goes Republican. Probably will not mean that the Senate goes Republican, although it will become more Republican. That will bring about lots of hearings and challenging and questioning of the healthcare reform legislation. It'll tee it up as a major issue in the 2012 presidential election, and who knows what will happen from there. I hope we don't simply go back to square one. I hope we can learn from our gains and learn from our mistakes, and continue to try to perfect a system that accomplishes access, bends the cost curve down, ensures quality, and promotes innovation.
But I suppose in the end, politics is a compromise. It may zigzag, but in the end, it progresses. But
politics should be a compromise. Unfortunately, in the United States, in Washington, compromise is sometimes seen as a dirty word.
Sure.
And some of the great centrists and compromisers in the Congress have lost their seats in this sort of wave of ideological rigidity. But then hopefully lessons will be learned from that as well.
Right. But let's remember our science. Let's remember biotechnology. You as president of Bio and CEO of Bio, the US organization, what do you see now going forward?
I worry right now about the model. I look at the challenges that we're finding in the science. It turns out that biology and disease are more complicated than we thought. I worry about the problems of capital formation, investors being increasingly wary about investing in biotechnology. I worry about the increasing difficulty of getting things approved at the FDA and the overemphasis on risk as opposed to benefit there. And I worry about our products being reimbursed given the budgetary problems. As a result of all that worrying, and we at Bio have initiated a new project, which we're calling, for want of better terms perhaps, the next big thing. And we're looking for some new paradigm-shifting, game-changing, booster rocket ideas that might change the climate. And so I've recently hired on as a consultant Elias Zarhuni, who used to be the head of the NIH in the United States, and we're touring the country, talking to thought leaders, to Wall Street, to CEOs, and we're going to come up with a list of big ideas, and then take them to our board in December and pick one or two, and see if we can give the system a jolt.
And that comes all the way back to policy change again.
Yeah,
which is your job.
Yeah, a policy change can be a part of that. There may be some things that we can do that don't require policy change. If you've noticed in the Alzheimer's front, a lot of companies, big pharma companies, have been frustrated with their inability to achieve results, and so they've decided voluntarily, pretty much outside of the bounds of government, to pool their data in this sort of pre-competitive space. And instead of saying, let's let our competitors go down the same blind alleys that we went down, the thought is, well, then we may go down the same blind alleys that they went down, and that's spinning our wheels some more. So I think that's an intriguing concept, and I think we at Bio might want to consider whether that's something that we want to promote for a variety of diseases, so that we can put our cards more on the table, more face up, and learn from one another, and then go back to our laboratories and compete anew.
Jim Greenwood, thank you very much indeed for coming on the show.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me again.